Apparently, it does sometimes happen among the ranks of the affluent that someone feels a low-grade gnawing emptiness at the very center of things. I recently read in the New York Times about a Wall Street trader who claimed he'd become so addicted to money that he felt let down when he received only $3.6 million for his bonus. He was worried that he would run out of money and envious that some of his colleagues had received more. Karl Marx said that money is the universal self-contained value of all things. Hence, it has robbed the whole world, the human world, as well as nature, of its proper value. Money is the alienated essence of man's labor and life, and this alienated essence dominates him as he worships it. Building on this thought, the philosopher and critic Walter Benjamin even speculated that capitalism had become a religion of blame which offers the wealthy the great comfort and convenience of blaming the poor for their own poverty. Once upon a time there was avarice. Now there is affluenza. It is described as a painful, contagious, socially transmitted condition of overload, debt, anxiety, and waste, resulting from the dogged pursuit of more. Avarice was at least considered a sin, one of 7 deadly, for which we bore moral responsibility. But affluenza befalls us as a disease. It's not even our fault. We're just its victims. Envy is the gasoline of American capitalism, writes John Lahr in a recent review of Death of a Salesman. And beyond greed of mere individuals, what social institution could possibly embody the pursuit of wealth more emphatically than the modern corporation? Here is affluenza writ large, chartered, capitalized, and even given the rights of personhood. Yet it too is an addict, its next fix waiting in the quarterly statement. As an artist, I imagine my characters inhabiting a sort of corporate purgatory. In the Divine Comedy, Dante described purgatory as a region between heaven and hell, where, after much reflection, departed souls might achieve redemption. Borrowing from the existential atmosphere of the plays of Samuel Beckett, I imagine this purgatory to be in the here and now. I want to give my wooden figures an extended time out there, as if they might think a bit more deeply about their actions and values. And this is where the viewer encounters them. Frozen, falling, cracking under pressure, and more recently hollowed out and cut into pieces. It's a view of the powerful without their power, the emperor without his clothes, looking ridiculous. His foot just above the unseen banana peel. Although I want to address contemporary social issues, I see my work in relation to a long tradition of vernacular figurative sculpture carved from wood. For many centuries, wooden figures were used in niches and altars by the Christian Church as a nonverbal means of religious indoctrination, often for the illiterate masses. They were used as figureheads on the bows of sailing ships to inspire courage and project power, both military and commercial. And in the 19th century, wooden figures stood outside shops to stimulate commerce in everything from tobacco to women's undergarments. A fourth source of inspiration is the uncanny presence of wooden puppets, dolls, and mannequins. For my purposes, I want to recruit this lineage of carved wooden figures, which comes from a populist rather than high art tradition, and press it into service as a source of ambiguous Americana or anxious icons. People are always interested in how I make my sculptures, so I thought I would run through the process using several sculptures and show you the various steps that I repeat time after time in going from an idea to a finished object. Usually I start with a sketch, which is a way of just getting my idea out where I can look at it. After I've sketched it, I then make a clay maquette or model from which to carve. They're usually 6 or 8 inches tall and made out of fired terracotta. I call this device the shadow machine. I'm sure the Egyptians had some version similar, but this is my version. The whole thing is on a swivel, which can be aimed at the sun, and the clay maquette then makes a silhouette on a piece of paper, which I can trace around with a pencil. Once I have that information, and I can take a side view, front view, and top view by just changing the position of the maquette on the frame, then I take those flat pieces of paper and scale them up using an opaque projector into the full size that the sculpture is actually going to be. Here I am measuring out the block for the torso of the kneeling man. I'll then cut this block out of the log with the chainsaw. There is the block, and there is the pattern tacked to the block, the pattern that I've made from projecting the shadow of the maquette. This will be cut out of the block with the chainsaw. And here I have skipped several months of work. I'm sorry I don't have a slide or two of the middle of the process, but you can see a hand in the foreground there and see the figure without the hands, head, necktie, or feet. There is the head being carved. Like you can see the tool marks. That will all be sanded out eventually. And there is the sculpture put together. Here it is painted and finished, painted with tempera paint and with wax applied to it to give it a little bit of sheen. There's the back view. I like to use the cracks in the wood to increase the expressive power of the sculpture. Here is another project. This one was called Chorus. It was actually 4 figures. Here's a sketch. There's the maquette of one of the figures. Here I am working on that figure without the head added yet. There is a head, and you can see the features marked out but not yet carved. The heads look very strange when they're being worked on. Two heads on top of the full-size shop drawing of the arms and torso with the head left off. You can see where the head will be positioned. A little farther along. Here I'm working on one of the heads. You can see how it will go onto the body. And there you can see the size of the sculptures. This is the group Chorus. I was thinking of the chorus, which is a group of citizens in a Greek tragedy that often warns the protagonist of impending danger. This was finished in 2008, so a lot of people saw this as having to do with the financial crisis. This is a drawing for the sculpture Cover Up, 3 men and 1 woman under a carved wooden shroud. Now I've taken posable artist mannequins and covered them with a plaster-soaked cloth. Here is my assistant, David Caldwell, beginning to carve one of the logs that the shroud will be carved from. And here, after much work, is David hollowing out the shroud. Now the parts of the figures are being added. There's actually a plywood surface that they are bolted to inside the shroud, and the various parts are being added on. I think you can see my maquette in the background there that I'm following. Turning the sculpture over proved to be quite a challenge. You could not pivot it on the feet of the figures because the sculpture was so heavy it would break the feet. So David and I devised this machine in which the sculpture had to be strapped, a modified hand truck, to turn the sculpture right side up. And there it is finished. If you look carefully, I think you can see where the heads of the figures are under the cloth. In 2009, the North Carolina Museum of Art commissioned me to make a sculpture for its permanent collection. I wanted to hang it from the ceiling, so um, how I began was to take a posable figure and construct a model ceiling in my studio, and then put the sculpture up under the ceiling so I could pose it and look at it from below. Here is the clay maquette. Here is the full-size drawing. I used my own face as a model. Here are the full-size shop drawings of some of the pieces, the arms and leg sections. And here I am cutting one of the logs. And there you can see the blocks containing, the one in the front is lower leg, and then there's another lower leg and a right arm. So I'd figured out how big the blocks needed to be to carve out the size pieces for the sculpture. Then we're fast forwarding several months. Here is the sculpture, more or less assembled and carved, but without the head, hands, and feet. I kind of like it this way, strapped to a desk to be worked on. Then I needed to hang the sculpture up exactly the way it would be positioned at the North Carolina Museum of Art and stand below it and see what corrections I needed to make. And there it is at the museum. In the 3 years since my show Inverted Utopias at the North Carolina Museum of Art, I've begun a conscious effort to expand my production beyond simply carved wooden figures. As with Deskman, I want to expand the context in which I place figures into a more developed tableau, which can include objects like artificial plants, props like the desk and lights, and sometimes other figures. I've always made small terracotta maquettes for the wooden figures, but fired clay is now sometimes the material of the finished sculpture itself. Modeling in clay also leads to the laborious, liberating possibilities of mold making, which in turn opens the gateway for casting in all kinds of materials, from concrete to paper mache to plastic resins. There is also now the possibility of multiples of the same form, using the mold not only as a tool, but as a metaphor. The eyes of the 5 busts of committee could be changed, but only by the white gloves of curators, a frustration for viewers who were not allowed to touch. Motorizing the pieces eliminates that problem. I used to worry that sometimes I might offend potential patrons since they tend to be members of the same class, which often receives less than flattering treatment in my sculptures. But then a friend pointed out that that is indeed unlikely, since everyone thinks the sculptures are about someone else. That was a relief until it dawned on me that I, too, thought they were about someone else. In America, power never quite shows itself openly for what it is, or else it loses some of its power. In other words, part of its power lies in the fact that it is disguised. Business as usual is one of those disguises. And in this disguised form, as power siphons wealth ever upward toward the top of the pyramid, the disparity increases between the gates and the ghettos. And the American dream threatens to become the American nightmare.